A pattern is a design in which lines, shapes, forms, or colors are repeated. Today, in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to create a hand-drawn, repeated seamless pattern. These are the materials you are going to need. A square sheet of paper. I used a 4x4 inch piece that I cut out. You can use any size that you prefer. The second would be a larger sheet of paper that's at least 4 times the size of the small square. So for mine, I used one that is bigger than 8x8 inch. You need to vary according to the size that you will be using. You will also need a pair of scissors, a pencil, eraser, sharpener, ruler, and masking tape. To create a pattern that repeats, first we're going to start off with the small square. I'm just going to put this paper underneath so you can see me as I draw the lines. I'm using a small piece of paper that is 4 inches by 4 inches, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to be drawing lines to split the small square into 4 smaller squares. So you don't have to use the same dimensions as I am, but it should be small enough that you can repeat it and fit it onto your bigger piece of paper. And we do want to be pretty accurate about how we are measuring our squares because we need to cut it up later on and make sure that they fit back together. So just take extra care and detail when you measure and draw out your lines. Okay, so right now I have my square with 4 smaller squares, and I'm going to be able to design whatever design that I want to have right now. Something that we do want to take note is that you're going to draw on the inside and not have anything touch the edges or go off the page. So make sure that drawings are wholly contained within the square itself. So I'm just going to do some simple shapes. You have a triangle, a swirl, have a circle. So it can go to the edge, but just make sure that it doesn't go over the edge. So when you are done with this, what we're going to do next is you're going to carefully cut the square into the 4 smaller squares. Make sure you cut it pretty accurately, as we mentioned earlier, so that they can all fit back and form another square after we have rearranged them. So I do want to keep them in the same order. So I have my square right now that is cut up into 4. What you're going to do next is you need to rearrange them. So what we want to do is that we want to bring these 4 edges right to the middle so that we can add more drawings and fill up the parts that are still empty so that the pattern looks more complete. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to diagonally swap the 2 pieces over here and then the 2 pieces over here. So I'm going to take these 2 and I'm just going to swap them. I'm not doing any rotations. You're just going to move them as they are to the other side. So I'm going to do that with these 2 corners too. So swapping it such that the 4 corners are now right in the middle. Okay, so after this what we are going to do is we want to tape these 4 back together as accurately as we can with our masking tape. So I do use a tape that I can draw on. If you use like Scotch tape, it's a bit more difficult because you can't really draw on the Scotch tape. So I'm just going to use masking tape. You can use like washi tape if you have, that's like a little bit fancier. So if you are a teacher and you are doing this in class, you may want to have the students tear out 4 small pieces of tape before you get them to tape so that they're ready and they can also pass the tape on to their classmates. Okay, so what we want to do now is that we have all these empty spaces that do not have any patterns yet. So the same thing, you're just going to fill them up, but you also do not want anything to run off the edges. So all these areas right here, if you draw something, you don't want it to run off the page. Okay, so keep all your drawings contained and full within the blank space that you have. So maybe I want to add some more triangles. And you can go over the lines, no problem. Like, you don't have to keep within the boxes. So you see my triangles going across all 4 boxes. I'm gonna have maybe, you can join it to the previous pattern also, just make sure that it doesn't come off the page. If you want your pattern to be a bit more full, you do want to fill up the space as much as you can, and it can be as complicated as you want it, but maybe if you're doing this for the first time, you can do something simpler so that you get the hang of it, and then you can move on to something more complicated. Okay, so this is my finished square. I'm going to show you how it's going to fit in to the rest of the pattern. So I did this previous design earlier. So I have the square that I've completed, and what's going to happen is that you're going to trace the square 4 times onto your piece of bigger paper, or you can do it as many times as you want depending on how big you want your pattern to be. So how I do this is the old school way of coloring with my pencil on the back and then tracing it again to transfer the graphite onto the bigger piece of paper. So what I'm going to do now with my design is I'm going to flip it to the back and I'm going to color it. Okay, so as you go along and you start transferring, you may need to recolor the back. Oops. Okay, so now I have my bigger sheet of paper over here. You want to make sure that the paper is at least 4 times the size of the smaller square. So my square over here is 4 by 4, so I made sure that my paper is at least 8 by 8 inches. So what you're going to do now is you're just going to align your design at the bottom right corner, and I'm just going to trace over it. You may want to have a sharper pencil so that you can get more accurate lines, but this is just so you get a sense of where the different shapes should be, and then we can trace it out later again to darken the marks. So what you're going to see happen is that the 2 edges right here are gonna align with the edges at the bottom so that it becomes a pattern that repeats seamlessly. So with my students, what I sometimes do is that I get them to trace with a different color so that they remember where they have already traced and where they haven't. So you can do that if you need to. You do want to make sure that you're holding it quite tightly down with your other hand to make sure that the block doesn't shift. So if you're not super sure where you have traced, you can lift it up lightly to check. So if you can see right here, there's already a semblance of the design. So I can lift up the whole thing, and I've transferred one of my designs. So I'm just going to continue going, and you can just keep going until you have the right size that you want. And then now, like, I can see that it's getting a bit lighter. I'm just gonna, some of the graphite has transferred onto the paper, and it's losing kind of how much graphite there is on the back. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more graphite by coloring. Okay, so now I have a very, very light kind of idea of where everything is. I can go back in with pencil to trace everything out, or I can go straight with a marker also. So with my students, I get them to use a pencil first just so that they can erase. And you can always refer back to your design to kind of see the parts where maybe it's a little bit too light for you to see the design. But you kind of get a sense of where everything is, and you are able to line up the 4 different squares to form a bigger repeating pattern. Okay, so there you have it. I have traced it 4 times and it's formed a repeating pattern. So you notice that the image that we drew the first time before we cut the paper up is actually right in the middle. Yeah, so this is how you create a pattern that is repeating seamlessly, so you can't really identify where exactly the 4 smaller squares were. So that's the idea in creating a pattern that is seamless and it looks like there is no end.